Yes. We're here with Mr. Greer today. Mr. Greer, is there any legal reason why we can't proceed with sentencing today?
No, Your Honor.
Mr. Vico, you move for sentence.
Yes, Your Honor.
I'll hear from the people first.
Thank you, Your Honor. As the court is aware, on September 6th of 2018, the defendant pled guilty to count 1 of indictment 2018-125 to murder in the second degree, Class A1 felony. At that time, the people recommended the court sentence the defendant to 22 years to life in state prison. On February 6, 2018, the defendant took a stolen .45 caliber Kimber pistol and held it to his brother James Bawn's head. The victim's last words, his last calls for help, are forever memorialized on the 911 call he made. His final pleas for help were never answered. They were silenced by the gun that his brother held to his head. When 911 picks up, you can hear the defendant saying, "If I hear 911 on that call, you better hang up." And then you hear the victim say, "My brother's holding a .45. He's threatening to shoot me right now. He's got it in my face." Next, you hear what appears to be a gunshot. The call goes silent, and the only thing that can be heard is the 911 operator saying, "Hello, hello." But the defendant didn't stop at that single shot that you can hear on that call. He shot James a total of 4 times. James Bawn had 2 penetrating wounds to the head, 1 to the torso, and 1 to the neck and torso area. After that, the defendant left his dead brother, went to a neighbor while holding that stolen .45 caliber Kimber pistol, tells the neighbor, "I messed up, I need a cigarette." The neighbor sees a gun in the defendant's waistband, tries to calm down the defendant, and tells him, "Get some cigarettes in order to calm him down." The defendant says, "I messed up, I murdered my brother. I'll give you the gun if you help hide me out." The neighbor says no, and the defendant then goes, crouches behind a truck, and hides the gun. He hides the pistol that he had used to silence his brother's calls for help. Moments later, the police arrive and arrest the defendant. Now, earlier that very day, the defendant had taken that same stolen pistol that he held to James's head and shot him, and threatened his other brother, Matthew. He took that pistol while Matthew was in the shower and did a dry run, held it over the shower curtain, and shot and pulled the trigger several times. Fortunately for Matthew, that weapon was not loaded at that time. These actions by the defendant on the very day that he killed his brother James shows the defendant's malintent and his growing level of dangerousness that day. The actions of the defendant displayed his callous disregard for human life, for the life of his very own brother. Your Honor, I have reviewed the pre-sentence investigation report, and in that report, it is indicated that the defendant appeared to show no remorse, that he was not very forthcoming, and he was very guarded when he spoke to probation. And in fact, the only remorse that he appeared to show was for the fact that he did not want to spend the rest of his life in prison. Your Honor, again, the people recommended, and the people still recommend, that the court sentence the defendant to 22 years to life in state prison. Thank you.
Mr. Greer.
Thank you, Your Honor. Your Honor, it's always tough to make an argument to the court on behalf of a defendant in a situation such as this. But we have to take into account the fact that this didn't happen in a vacuum. Someone lost their life at my client's hands. He knows that. He caused this incident. He's the reason he's standing here. He has pled guilty in this courtroom. And I think while the prosecutor points to the probation report as indicating my client shows no remorse and all these things, portrays a set of facts, I think we're not looking at the circumstances as a whole. It didn't happen in a vacuum. Nobody can get under somebody's skin like a family member, specifically a sibling. These boys in this house fought back and forth numerous times. It's listed in the probation report that there's multiple calls where my client's the victim, there's multiple calls where another brother's the victim. What was going on in this house has been described to me by another family member as nursery school. And that may be an apt description of what went on in that house. My client was guarded when he spoke to probation. He didn't want to spend his time soiling other members of his family. He's destroyed his family. He knows he's destroyed his family. But we're ignoring the fact that my client didn't put his family through a trial. He came into this courtroom, he took an oath to tell the truth, and pled guilty to the charges, Your Honor. He looked you in the eye and pled guilty. He's discussed it with his father who's here. Another interesting point in the probation report is the statement that a victim referral was made to Orange County Crime Victim Unit. To date, a response has not been received from the victim's family members or victim Matthew Bawn. Just above that, it indicates that the defendant's attorney provided the undersigned with a letter that is attached to this report from the defendant's father, William Bawn. Well, let's be clear. William Bawn, who sits in this courtroom, is the victim's family. He's lost 2 sons as a result of this incident. But we want to paint a picture about George, and only George. And we want to talk about the victim's family, so anybody who speaks on George's behalf couldn't possibly be the victim's family. Well, Mr. Bawn's here. He wrote a letter to Your Honor. He's not exonerating his son's behavior, nothing like that. But to suggest that the victim's family didn't speak, they did. But just because he's, to an extent, supporting his son, he's not asking Your Honor to release his son, but he's offering an explanation of the childhood, the upbringing, what the household was like. So the victim's family did speak here. He's lost 2 sons as a result of this incident, and my client is well aware that George is responsible for this. He's distraught over this incident. He may not convey it very well to the Department of Probation, but again, he didn't put his family through a trial. That shows remorse. He pled guilty here. He didn't ask the court. He wasn't looking for loopholes. He's taken responsibility for his actions. He has a young son who was caught up in this to an extent too, who had to explain to his son, and there was a telephone call about that. And it's interesting that the prosecutor highlights the moments in this case where George looks his worst, and it's hard not to look the way they painted him. But at the same time, he cried on the phone with his son and told his son, be better than me. Make more of yourself than I did. I did this to me, you didn't do this. My client has acknowledged his remorse, he has taken his responsibility. It may not be in the words that we all want to hear. My client's in a position, and again, I understand the severity of this charge, and so does my client. And he understands that he put himself here. But he lost a brother, he destroyed his family, he put his son in a position that he won't be there for his son to grow up. He knows all that, he owns all that. He's cried about it with me on numerous visits to the jail. So the fact that he couldn't express that to the Department of Probation, that's not a lack of remorse. He was guarded. He doesn't want to soil his family anymore. I was prepared to outline for Your Honor some of the things that went on in that house, and my clients asked me not to. Not because they didn't occur, and not because they didn't play a role in what ultimately happened here, but he acknowledges his responsibility, and his family's been through enough. There's other components here that need to be taken into consideration, and again, these are not excuses, but they are a part of this incident as a whole. Alcohol played a large role in this. My client was severely intoxicated. He has a problem with alcohol, even if he doesn't want to admit it. The record is pretty clear that he has a problem with alcohol. And also a component of this is mental health. Your Honor, we were allotted the time from the court and the money from the state to take a mental health forensic evaluation. We had a doctor who met with my client extensively. The effort that he put in was thorough, to say the least. And just because we don't have enough for a mental health defendant doesn't mean it wasn't a component here. My client has struggled with depression, alcoholism, and other issues with mental health, and those played a role here too. As I said, it's not a vacuum. But he stands here before Your Honor as someone who came into this courtroom and took responsibility for his actions. We didn't do hearings, we didn't do a trial. He didn't want to put his family through that. He acknowledged what he had done, and what he had done is destroy his family. And he came in this courtroom and he admitted that. He took his responsibility seriously, he looked Your Honor in the eye and took his plea. Because that's what happened. But it didn't happen in a vacuum. And that too should be part of the record here. Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you. Mr. Bawn, the law affords you an opportunity to be heard before and post-sentence. You're not required to say anything, but if you do want to say something, now would be the time to say. Is there anything you'd like to say?
I'm sorry for destroying my family. I do have remorse. What happened was very tragic. Cannot speak on it.
Unfortunately, it's a tragedy of your own making. I know that Mr. Greer mentioned that this seems to be described by some people as a nursery school atmosphere in connection with your household. And that's probably related to siblings getting under each other's skin, as Mr. Greer had indicated. However, there is absolutely no excuse for the actions that you took. I understand that you're guarded with respect to keeping family secrets, whatever those family secrets are, but there is absolutely no justification for the callous disregard you showed towards your brother. I would note, as the people did, there were multiple gunshot wounds in connection with this. That shows the callousness and the depravity of the acts that you committed. And as such, it's the judgment and sentence. This court, you're sentenced to an indeterminate period of incarceration, the minimum of which will be 20 years, the maximum of which will be life. There's a mandatory $300 surcharge, a $50 DNA data bank fee, and a $25 crime victim assistance. The aforesaid does constitute the judgment and sentence of this court. I would note for the record, I did read the letters that were attached not only by his father, who certainly is a victim today, a victim of losing 2 sons, but as Mr. Greer acknowledged, that's because of his client, as well as some other people have submitted letters in support of Mr. Bawn. However, the aforesaid constitutes the judgment and sentence of this court. Please read him his right to appeal.
You have a right to appeal to the appellate division second department within 30 days, and in addition, upon proof of your financial inability to retain counsel to pay the costs and the expenses of the appeal, you have the right to join the appellate division second